I'm going to ask you this once, and I'm not going to ask you this again. I need you to stop trying so hard to please people and not be a villain in someone else's book. Because being the villain in someone else's book means you finally stood on your boundaries and you finally stood on business. It means you finally put yourself first, and it means for once in your life you finally looked out for yourself. Be the villain in someone else's book, because I promise you it's not all as bad as it seems. Sometimes you just have to allow yourself to be able to say, this doesn't serve me, this person doesn't serve me, so I am now going to prioritize myself. The moment that we decide we have to sacrifice ourselves and sacrifice our happiness for those of us around us, that is the moment where we start to build self-resentment, where we start to lose ourselves, and where we start to become a different person. A person that is completely different from the person that we've worked so hard to build. And we are not going to sacrifice that, because we are not going to sacrifice years of hard work. We're not going to sacrifice a day of hard work. We're not going to sacrifice a week of hard work. We're not going to sacrifice a month of hard work. We're not going to sacrifice the hard work that we put into ourselves just to please other people around us. You need to be okay with being written as the villain in someone else's book. You have to be okay with that in order for you to progress and proceed in life. And that doesn't mean just being a downright awful person. A lot of the times you end up being the villain in someone else's book when you finally put your foot down and you have your boundaries. And that's okay. And it's because that is something that's necessary for you to do in this life. Not everyone is going to agree with the boundaries you have, and it may rub some people the wrong way. But if they are not comfortable with understanding the boundaries and the things that make you have those boundaries and put your foot down, and the things that make you the person that you are today, they are not the person that should be around you in this life. They are not the person that deserves to be around you. If they don't seek to understand why you have the boundaries that you have, they are the person that should just not be around you. People who feel as if you owe them something. People who think that you as an individual owe them something. It doesn't matter where in your relationship you are with that person, whether it be a friend or whether it be someone romantic. Someone that thinks you owe them something is someone that you should not be around. Because the moment that they think you owe them something and they don't receive what they think they're owed, you will become the villain in their book. If that person has the audacity to tell you that you owe them something, you should not be around that person, and you need to be okay with being the villain in their book. You do not need to sacrifice your faith. You do not need to sacrifice your beliefs. You don't need to sacrifice anything important to who you are as a person just to avoid being the villain in someone else's book. Okay? You need to stand by who you are, and you don't need to give up your beliefs and your values just to avoid being the villain in someone else's book. If you've done what you can, if you've explained your boundaries and you've expressed that, then you need to be okay with being the villain. The importance of putting yourself first and leading with your heart, leading with your boundaries as well, is very imperative to you staying who you are to your core and being honest with yourself and being true to yourself. Because I've sacrificed myself for many people in this world once before. And every single time I've sacrificed myself, I left not knowing who exactly I was, and I had to figure it out all over again. And I promise you that the same thing can happen to you if you allow yourself to sacrifice who you are and your boundaries. You don't want to double back to that. You don't want to double back after putting in so much work in order for you to remain a resilient and strong person, because you are resilient and strong. You have it in you. Everyone has it in them. It just takes hard work. It takes believing in yourself. It takes optimism. It takes discipline. And if you decide to give up on any of that, then I promise you, it will be a very difficult time for you. You have to be willing to stay true to yourself. And that simply means being okay with being the villain in someone else's book. There will be plenty of stories that will be written with endings that we don't agree with. The same with movies. And we have to be okay with accepting that, because we were put through that for a reason. They always say that God's rejection is just redirection. And we can redirect ourselves to a point of being in a completely different situation than we were in 6 months to a year to 5 years ago, and be completely unrecognizable in a positive way. And once we are in that place of just being completely unrecognizable, I promise you we will be in a happier place. I really want you guys to take a long, long, long look at times where you may have sacrificed yourself and given up a lot just to please somebody. Because I can guarantee you that every single time you've done that, it hasn't been worth it. It hasn't been the thing that fulfills you, and hasn't been something that you were proud of. And you may be looking back on it now and saying, well, gosh, I wish that I would have put more time and effort into explaining my boundaries and staying firm on my boundaries and being true to myself. Because I feel those same things all the time. Let me just be very clear on what I've experienced and what I don't want to ever see anyone go through. I had at one point hatred for myself for doing that so many times. And it happened over and over again to a point to where I sat down and I looked at myself and I said to myself and I said to God, who am I? I don't even know myself anymore. What am I going to do? How am I going to figure this out? Who am I? I went 5 days without showering. I was so depressed because I felt like every single part of me, I had lost it. I had lost every single thing that made me the person that I am today. And I had to go back and rebuild myself for another month. And that was one of the most intense months ever. And I still never felt like I was myself afterwards. I had to keep going. And I had to spend a lot of time alone. I had to put myself first. I had to spend a lot less time talking to other people and just really sitting with myself and processing the thoughts and processing the behavior that put me in a position of just simply sacrificing everything about myself, changing myself for someone else, all to not be the villain in someone else's book. And the moment that I realized in the end, I still ended up being the villain in that person's book, it gave me so much resilience. And I say that because it affirmed something that I thought all along. No matter what you do and no matter how much you sacrifice for a person, if they feel like you owe them something and you don't give it to them, in the end, you will always be the villain in their book. Always. Which is why I circle back to how I started this. You have to be okay with being the villain in someone else's book, because if you put all that time and that energy and that effort into trying to be someone or trying not to be the villain in someone else's book, you will lose yourself. And I want you to keep the parts of you that make you you. I don't want anyone to lose themselves. I don't want to see that, because it's very difficult, because I've lived that, because it sucks. Allow the story to write itself. Don't try to write the story. Don't try to control things that you cannot control. Be who you are, live in your truth, stick to your boundaries, and don't change yourself for someone, all because they don't like who you are to your core. If you know you are happy with the person that you've become and you've worked really hard to become that person, don't ever think about changing yourself for someone, because I promise you, none of it will be appreciated.